My name is Samira, and I am a patient living with a rare disease called neuromyelitis optica. I'm also the founder and executive director of the Samira Foundation, which is a global nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness of NMOSD, MOGAD, and other rare neuroimmune conditions. We're very passionate about building communities of support for patients and their caregivers, which is why today's program is especially special. We support research and advocate on behalf of patients. We are very proud to be patient-led, patient-powered, science-driven, therapy agnostic, and diversity for us is a superpower. Very happy to share that we have over 60 ambassadors from 22 countries who speak 19 languages. And before I introduce you to our fellow ambassadors who are leading this amazing new program we're launching today, just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this session today, and when it becomes available for replay, we will let you know. And please be interactive, engage in this. This program is for you. It is to help you. It might even help you outside of having a rare disease. So do not be shy. Ask Maggie questions, ask Nell questions, roll up your sleeves, get your hands and feet wet, and let's get into it. And without further ado, I am pleased to introduce you all to Dr. Maggie Kang. She will introduce herself in depth in a moment, but I'm very proud to call her a friend, as well as a TSF Caregiver Ambassador. She's been so gracious to do this program for us. And to help her today is her sidekick, Ms. Nell Choi, who everyone knows and loves. She was TSF's first junior ambassador, got sick with NMO at 9 years old, went on to write her first book. I say first because I believe that she will write many more in her lifetime, and has been just an exemplary human being and advocate since getting struck with rare disease at such a young age. So thank you, and please join me in welcoming Maggie and Nell.
Thank you, Samara. Thank you so much for having us today. Welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for making the choice to be here on your Saturday morning. I would first of all like to just point out that we're here from multiple countries. So I wondered if everybody could just rename themselves and add just where they're from. It's just kind of fun to see how people are really here from many different continents. So I'd also like for this session to be really engaging and interactive, like Samara said. And if you are able or comfortable doing that, I'd love to see you on camera. So we are now going to start. I want to be mindful of your weekend time, so this is what we're going to do. The teaching content, the material is going to take me about 13, 14 minutes to get through. I'm going to stop midway and see if you guys have any questions or comments. And then when we finish it off, I want to leave the rest of the hour to you. I'm going to open up the session for you to ask me anything, make any comments, share your experiences. So let's get started. I'm Maggie. I'm a mom caregiver to Nell, my daughter here, who was diagnosed with NMOSD at age 9. I'm also a physician, and I trained to become a certified life coach when I recognized the very critical role mental well-being would play in for recovery. What I learned was that when I brought these coaching concepts into our family life, it was transformative for all of us. And so that's why I wanted to bring these concepts to you. The overarching theme of my 3-part series is to teach you bite-sized coaching concepts so that you can apply them to your lives and help you move forward. Today, I'm going to be talking about pain versus suffering. Now, I know that probably most, if not all of you by now have seen my TEDx talk, and that was the very topic that I covered. And because I got so much great feedback and it seemed to resonate with people, I wanted to delve into that concept a little more deeper today and really break it down so that you can be crystal clear about these concepts and apply them in your lives. So also, as I'm going through this, feel free to put any comments and questions into the chat. The first thing I want to say is that pain is part of the human experience. It is natural to feel sadness and grief and loss and disappointment, all of that. And I say this because I think we live in a world where we're often given messages to just like seek happiness and pleasure and to avoid pain. You see these ads saying, oh, you should eat this amazing ice cream or drink this wine or binge on this series on Netflix. You're going to feel so much better. And sometimes we do, and we think that that is actually going to give us pleasure, but what oftentimes we're really doing is avoiding pain. And that is actually the problem, that when we avoid or resist pain, we create suffering. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. This was a quote by Haruki Murakami that I shared in my TEDx talk. And what that just basically means is that we cannot control the circumstances of our lives, and some will be painful. The reason why suffering is optional is because it is our choice to decide how we're going to respond to that painful circumstance. Now, in order to really show you what I mean by that, I'm going to walk you through a few examples. Pain can be either physical or emotional. So when you get a shot, it is natural to think that that tip of the needle, when it pierces the skin surface and it is advanced into the muscle, when the contents of the syringe are injected in, that would cause pain. But if you come into that experience with thoughts like, I am deathly afraid of needles, I hate doctors, I hate hospitals, you're going to feel tense. And you can imagine that that tension in that muscle is going to create a lot of resistance to that needle that's being advanced into your arm, which will create more soreness both at the time of injection and after. When you resist pain, you create suffering. Here's an example of sort of a mundane day-to-day emotional pain that we probably have all encountered. Say you have great plans to meet your friends at the end of the day, your friends and family, and you can meet at this great restaurant. So you get into your car and you get on the highway, and all of a sudden there's so much traffic, you were not expecting this. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can accept that, frustrating pain of traffic, or you can respond by choosing thoughts like, I should have left earlier. I should have checked my Waze and have known for this. And now I've ruined the night. So I want to point out that the choices that the thoughts that you choose are basically your response to a painful circumstance. And in this case, if you chose to blame yourself and make it a huge problem, then you're creating suffering. I also want to point out that if you accept pain, like let's say in this case, I've actually been in this situation quite a lot, living here right outside DC. And if I choose to accept that pain and I, just sort of accept it and move through it in my car, different possibilities have occurred to me because I'm open to them. Like, for example, once I decided I was going to pick up my phone and call a friend that I haven't talked to in so long, and it was this great opportunity to reconnect. And there are other times when I've had my kids in my car with me, and I recognized that this was an opening or sort of an opportunity for me to model patience for them. Now, I could choose either way, but it's just, I wanted to just point out that in every moment, you always have a choice. So the next example is something a little bit more personal and related to Nell's health struggles. So when Nell got this very nasty ear infection because she was on immunosuppressive medications, she was in the hospital for quite some time. And when she was discharged, they put her on long-term IV antibiotics, and she went home with a PICC line. I had to infuse those antibiotics every 8 hours for weeks. So the midnight infusion was the most challenging because it was at night, I was tired, and Nell was asleep. So when I was setting up the infusion equipment and running it, I was basically doing it in the dark and using my iPhone light as my only source of light. Once I did not connect the tubing correctly. And when I let the IV antibiotic flow, I could smell in the air, in the darkness, that something was wrong. And the medication had leaked out onto her bed. As in that moment, I also had a choice. I could have just accepted this pain of having made a mistake and then moved to figure out how to rectify it, or I could choose thoughts like these. I, as her mother and physician, should have done better. Like, how could I have made a mistake like that? And I have basically made her infection worse. Now, those were actually the thoughts that I chose. And I knew, even at that time, that in the deep recesses of my rational brain, that that was probably not the case. And maybe I was just really tired at the time, but the narrative that I chose to create for myself was about self-blame and just kind of creating, just like basically catastrophizing our situation. And so that actually created quite a bit of suffering for me. I didn't sleep that night, and it was a choice that I made that I'm very aware of. So Nell did recover, and she was fine eventually. And when she regained her strength, she went back to playing lacrosse. And this is my final example of the difference between pain and suffering. At one of her lacrosse games, she threw an interception that resulted in the other team scoring. After the lacrosse game, Nell came off the field and she was so upset. And she was beating herself up for having made that mistake and had chosen thoughts of, I'm not good enough to be on this team. So in this case, the pain was the disappointment of having made that error on the lacrosse field. And the suffering was the thoughts that she chose to spin around, like her response to having made a mistake, which was in this case that she thought she was not good enough. So, in response to this, I decided to offer a situation that was just completely different and to see what she thought about it. So I said, let's consider humans in the dinosaur age. Like, let's say a caveman fails to catch his hunt for the day, and so there's no meat for the tribe to eat at dinner. And so his pain is the disappointment of having not made the catch for the day. And the caveman doesn't go inside his cave and, sit there and say, I am not good enough, and I'm never going to be able to get this right, and I'm never going to be a valuable member of this tribe, and start binging on a bag of berries, right? Like, the caveman doesn't do that. He's going to get on with his life the following day and make the catch so they can survive. And so staying stuck in suffering in the cave for the caveman, had he chose to do that, would have been the equivalent of death. In our modern world, when we choose to stay stuck in suffering with all the thoughts that we've chosen for ourselves, we may not actually die, but we can't move forward. Which gets me back to this overarching theme of moving forward. And I think one of the ways we can do that is by learning, these concepts to accept and move through our pain. So I'm going to stop here and just see if anybody has any questions. But I also want to ask you all, if in this past week, can you think of a time when you resisted pain? If you'd like, you can throw it in the chat. If you want to share, feel free to unmute yourself.
Or you can raise your hand, and I don't know if you have the option to unmute, so I can unmute you too.
Thank you.
And if no one has anything quite yet, I can share something that happens in my day-to-day a lot, where I'm pretty conscious that I am avoiding pain, but I kind of do it anyways. So my school assigned quite a bit of summer work for this summer, and math is not my favorite subject. So when I have to do my weekly 1 to 2 hours of online math work and I don't want to, oftentimes I'll find myself just scrolling through Instagram like mindlessly to not think about that. And that's kind of my way of avoiding pain. And it doesn't make me feel necessarily that great after I do it, which is kind of how I know that I'm avoiding the pain, because I still have that obligation to do. But that's just one way that I notice myself avoiding it in my everyday life.
Yeah, that's such a good example. I think we've all been there. I've definitely been there. And I wonder when you're doing it, or even afterwards, how do you feel?
I feel pretty I guess heavy, because I know that I still have all that work weighing on me. I didn't really get anywhere, and um avoiding it, putting it in the back of my brain makes it feel probably even worse.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually glad that you brought that up because it's actually probably an experience that we've all had at some point in our lives. And it actually brings me back to the next point that I want to make in this talk. Now that we have covered sort of the difference of pain and suffering and multiple examples, I also now wanted to answer this question that maybe some of you have already had during this talk is how do you know if you have chosen to accept pain or create suffering? So, and I'm going to tell you that the answer is actually fairly simple, but it does take a little practice. It's just checking in with your body. And that was the reason why I asked Nell how she felt. And she described feelings of sort of heaviness and maybe regret. And that is actually the feeling of, those indicate actually an experience of suffering. So generally speaking, it means just feeling constricted in your body. So that could be like tightness in your throat or tightness in your chest. I always get like a little squeeze in my abdominal area where I know that this was just not quite right for me. And it's almost like you have less room to breathe kind of feeling. Versus if you've chosen to accept pain, oddly, it's very calm and it feels expansive as if you have more room to breathe. So that's just like a very quick way you could check in with your body to know kind of where you are with that. And in addition to that, sometimes like people have asked if you've like binged a whole series on Netflix and afterwards, how do you know if you've actually done it, or how do you know that this is a problem, like that you're creating suffering or that you just binge Netflix? And here's the answer. Check in with your body. So let's say you did binge a series of Netflix. I do that. We're watching Suits right now, actually. And I'll know if after Suits I binged that series and I know that it's a problem if I don't feel good. If I somehow feel regretful or feel tight, because I know that that is not the way I wanted to have spent my time. And I probably have not loads of work to get to. And so I don't know that that's a problem. There are other times when I actually sit there with my son and we plan to binge it. And we've got our popcorn and we're ready to go. And we can spend the whole night watching Suits. And afterwards, I feel like we had a great time and that was fun. And I'm super glad we did that. That's not a problem. So the act itself is not itself a problem. You check in with your body to determine whether or not you have avoided something, created suffering. So moving forward to my last point is this. When you encounter a situation where you know you have the choice to accept pain, how do you do it? And the answer I'm going to tell you through a little story. Now, as many of you know, was sick for a couple of years, and then of course we were on the pandemic. So Nell had never been away to any kind of sleepaway summer experience. This summer would have been the first time. So she chose her camp. She's doing this culinary camp in New York City. It would be the first time she'd be living in a dorm with a roommate. So she was just over the moon excited about this experience. And when we drove her off, we were too. And when we arrived at the dorm, her roommate was really unfriendly. It was so shocking. I've actually never seen that before. And it was just this immediate feeling of disappointment that maybe the summer isn't going to look the way we thought. And I didn't feel good about leaving Nell there, but I did. And she texted me later that day and said, yeah, my roommate's not super friendly, but I wonder what this is here to teach me. I mean, it was like, what? I thought In that moment, I realized that Nell was actually, she had chosen to accept her pain of disappointment, that this was not the roommate she had thought would be there. And I had chosen suffering because I was all lost in my thoughts about how maybe I made a mistake, this was not quite the right situation, and maybe I should have just had to go as a day camper. And I was sort of blaming myself and trying to sort of control the situation. And that was suffering. And Nell chose to accept her pain. Now, how did she move through her pain? By asking herself a powerful question. What is this here to teach me? And I will say that questions are powerful, useful questions. I mean, and to compare, a not so useful question would be something like, why am I always so unlucky? Why does this always happen to me? A question like that doesn't lead you to an openness about possibilities. It sort of like shuts it down and basically defines a situation as being bad. A question like, what is this here to teach me, opens you up to possibility. And so if you're ever in a situation you can't think of a question, I would keep this one in the back pocket because it is really powerful and broadly applicable to almost all situations. Like if you encounter, somebody who's not being nice, or somebody who has said something behind your back, or you are dealing, maybe you get like a bad grade, or you fail some kind of exam. All of those situations give you an opportunity to make a choice on how you're going to respond. So if you just think, I'm going to ask myself a powerful question, it actually keeps you open and allows you to move through your pain. So how this was helpful to Nim? Because she remained open to possibility and learning. That night, I will just tell you, her camp group went out to see the waterfront in Lower Manhattan, and she took a picture of this beautiful moon. And it was a blood moon that night. And she texted it to me, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is something that you could really focus on, sort of as like a micro moment to move forward from. So I mention that because when you're open to possibility, you are able to see things around you that give you joy and create emotions that you want to create. And so when she saw that, there was a feeling of awe and of beauty and strength, actually. And I said, let's focus on that. That is your micro moment, and you're going to build your narrative from that going forward. And for the rest of the time at camp, she sent me images of the foods that they were creating and of the friends she's made in her chef group and the teacher and all of that. So those were things that she focused on. And all of those were her micro moments. Basically, everything she took images of. And by the end of camp, she had a fantastic time. And I never heard anything about that roommate. So that is basically a good sort of walkthrough about pain versus suffering. Just to recap, I started with showing you examples of how you can understand the difference between pain and suffering. And suffering is really optional because it is your response to a situation. And then I talked about how you can know the difference in your body if you check in. And then I finished with, if you want to accept pain, how do you move through that pain? Asking yourself a powerful question. So now I think I would love to invite you all to ask questions or share an experience if you want, maybe get coaching if you're comfortable. And I will again throw a question out there for you all if you want something to respond to. I guess just general.
To say that if you want to speak, just please raise your hand and I can invite you on as a panelist, and you'll be able to unmute.
We have Mayan Choi has his hand up.
Okay. Do you want to? Do you want to bring him on?
Yeah, no, bring him on.
I did. There we go. Oh, and Mom, I think Michael also put something in the Q&A.
Let me see if I can open it up. Hey,
That's me. I go by Scott, but I'm the dad and husband. But I would like to just tell you guys, I am a practicing gastroenterologist, and Nell had all sorts of digestive issues forever and still does. And one of the ways I suffered is that I thought I could figure it out. I thought I could make a diagnosis for her bloating or whatever it was. And so we went through this entire evaluation and still couldn't really find any answers, because a lot of it tends to be diet and how she's feeling that day. So the narrative or the suffering that I underwent was, why can't I figure this out? I must be a bad gastroenterologist, and I don't have the ability to help my daughter. What's wrong with that, or what's wrong with me? And I think over time, though, I learned a lot about dietary stuff that I'd never even really knew about. I would tell my patients, "Oh, do this diet," but not really know what it means to be doing it, or seeing it. So I think that was the possibility that I saw in the pain. And then the other thing I found is I spent a lot more time with my patients. I think I was at a conference where somebody who was a physician was a caregiver, and he mentioned the same thing, that now that he sees things from a caregiver's perspective, you tend to spend a little more time with your patients and really get to know them, rather than, oh, here's a prescription, this is what you need. So I just wanted to share that, because I think that what Maggie's saying, what Nell's been through, has led to a lot of possibility I didn't really think was available to me beforehand. So thanks.
yeah. So when well, thank you for sharing that. And I definitely understand how you feel. It's interesting to hear that also from a physician perspective, right? I think most of us here are either caregivers or patients, and don't always appreciate that perspective of what you just shared from the physician. But I wondered how you are, how did these concepts sort of help you to move forward, once you become aware of those thoughts? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think they helped me really recognize the situations for what they are, and not for what my thoughts create. So as you said, pain is pain, but it doesn't have to be suffering. So I think, I recognize things earlier. I'll say that.
And how do you think you recognize it earlier?
Just by the way it makes me feel. I mean, if I'm starting to feel bad about, I call it buffering. When I start doing stuff that dulls the pain, it's my way of buffering. And when I do that, I know it makes me feel a certain way in my body, and I'm more tired. I'm more irritable. I have no patience. So you know that, right? You know that.
So the reason why I was asking you that was just to kind of also address a question that was put in the chat by Michael Devlin. It was this: many of us dealing with pain and suffering and setbacks often feel that we aren't able to choose our thoughts, that they just come upon us. Do you have any tips or techniques you would recommend to give us more control over our thoughts and how to choose better thoughts and reactions? So in sort of response to that, I was asking you how you kind of manage this, being aware of the difference between pain and suffering. So I think in all of your response, the answer is this: you check in with your body. And that is the first way you'll kind of know if you have chosen thoughts that are creating experience that are not your desired experience. So I guess going back to what I said, just keeping it very simple, like if you feel very constricted and you don't have enough sort of space to breathe and it feels tight, then most likely you've chosen a thought and created a narrative about your situation that is creating suffering. and how you can, okay, and then to address the question about how it feels like it just comes upon us. It comes upon us, or the belief or the feeling that it comes upon us is because we're not aware of our thoughts. And that also happens to me as well, like when I was blaming myself about not having picked up Nell's diagnosis originally, or earlier in my teen stuff. I thought that that was actually a fact, that my thought and my belief was a fact. I did not pick it up early enough. I'm her mother and the physician, and therefore I'm a problem. But what I learned with this whole conversation of coaching and the pain versus suffering concept is that we can have so many thoughts, and it can be very useful to write them all down. If, let's say, you get lost in sort of like your sea of thoughts and you're not quite sure what you want to think, and sometimes you don't always necessarily have the ability to choose a thought that is sort of like the correct thought, which I hate to say because all thoughts are fine because they're your thoughts. But my recommendation to you is this: get a piece of paper and just write them all down. You might be shocked to discover what is actually coming up in your head. And the things, when you see it on paper, when you walk away and you come back, you might even be shocked, thinking, how did I think that? I didn't even know that was the way I was thinking. It's actually kind of shocking. And it's a real sort of learning process. Another thing you could do, if you get really stuck in your thoughts and you're not quite sure how to move forward, you can hire a coach. That's what I did. And that person would help me unpack what was happening in my head and really question some of the default beliefs I had about myself that I didn't know that I had. So I would say, just as like an easy tip, maybe just get a piece of paper and write it down. It's a little bit different than journaling because you're just like writing down the phrases and listing your thoughts, like I hate myself, or I should have done better, or I'm not good enough, or I'm awesome, or whatever it is. You just write down a list of the phrases that are going through your head like a ticker tape. You just put it all down and just be curious and say, wow, what's happening? How is this, impacting how I feel?
I want to say one last thing on that before we address some of the other questions that have been coming through, is that's kind of what I did with my book and stuff as well. Just kind of when you write things down, it really takes you out of your head and it allows you to be open to those possibilities that my mom was explaining earlier. I noticed that as I wrote down all of my negative thoughts, they kind of just naturally transformed into positive ones, and noticing, hey, I'm actually so grateful that my symptoms have improved like a little bit more than yesterday. That's still something. And just getting it down on paper really just puts you in a better perspective and mindset. And one last thing as well is that Michael's question I really resonate with, because I would oftentimes, when I knew that that it was my choice, that I could create pain or suffering, what I did, which is not the right thing to do, is I started to blame myself for having thoughts that I knew were creating suffering. And that is not a useful thing to do at all. And just be aware of that as well. Just be aware, don't judge those negative thoughts that come through. And don't blame yourself if you feel like you don't have control over choosing your thoughts. It's okay. The main step is to be aware of them, and writing them down is like the first step.
Thank you so much for saying that. There's actually a point that I wanted to make in the talk, is that when you ask yourself a useful question, you're doing it without judgment. You're doing it in a state of curiosity. Why am I thinking that? And you're just not judging yourself. You're just giving yourself space to just examine your thoughts from a neutral standpoint. So thank you. Any other questions on stage?
Yeah, I have a comment and a question. First of all, I think I just want to say to the audience, we know this is the first one, so people might be a little bit shy to open up, and that's perfectly normal, but just know that Maggie is here for you, and it's a safe space. There, you can feel comfortable and in an environment where your questions are valid. They're never too dumb. They're never too emotional or anything like that. So please don't feel shy. But to sort of break the ice, I have a question. Well, maybe it's a two-part question. So the first is pain and suffering, to those who don't know what pain and suffering are and that there's a difference. all feels the same. So what are some kind of tips and tricks for us as we're feeling pain or suffering to be able to identify that, no, this is what pain is and this is what suffering is? So that's my first question. And my second question is, sometimes the easy thing is to not face our pain and to not face our challenges because it's too painful. And so I ask you, Maggie, what are some of the consequences you see, both short term and near term, to not facing your pain sometimes head on?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to take the second part of your question first, is that sometimes when we avoid pain for so long, one of the things that can happen is that we are numbing ourselves to that particular emotion, but it actually serves to numb everything. So you can't numb just like resentment and just not feel resentment and expect to feel the same degree of love or empathy. So one of the consequences that I have seen, not only just in myself, but in others, is that when you avoid pain long-term, you don't even have the ability to feel that much overall. And that means you're not fully having your human experience. You're not fully able to engage in relationships, not even with yourself. So it has some like pretty major consequences. And in all of that, you may not even be realizing it, but you're actually suffering. And you may have sort of this like chronic feeling of like disconnection and sort of, sadness, but you may not even be aware of it. And if something comes up in your life and everything is sort of like broken open, it could be maybe even like more traumatic for you in that particular case. So that's one of the consequences. And your first part of the question was something like, how do you know pain and suffering, that kind of thing? Okay. So
Like, how can you tell the difference?
yeah, checking in with your body. And I know that sounds super simple, and it took me quite a long time to really do that because, by the way, I was one of those people that didn't feel emotion for quite some time, and I sort of became a hardened person. And when I learned about checking with your body, I thought, what on earth does that even mean? Like, what is emotion? That useless thing out there, right? But really, it tells us everything. It has all of the answers, to be honest. Like if you're ever unclear about a decision, a choice, it is actually the answer is in your body. So the difference is really, do you feel tight and constricted and you have less room to breathe? I found this extremely helpful actually, versus calm. Oh, this is the other way I want to explain it. Suffering and resistance feels a lot like you're trying to control and you're like fighting against something. Accepting pain is sort of the release, a surrendering of sorts, but not surrendering in the way of like you give up and you don't care. Surrendering in the way of you're not trying to control. So, Alona, can you touch on empathy versus sympathy regarding pain? Alona, how do you feel about popping on? Just because I want to understand your question a little bit better. Hey,
Hi.
well, good to see you.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to understand is what I've now learned also being an NMO patient is even when I meet other people with other health conditions, I've learned that it's not, I've been told so many times it's not sympathy that I feel because I can understand what it is that they're struggling with or what they're dealing with, but it's also because I feel it. And like you said, it's more my body and it's more my emotions that I can say, even though I don't have X, Y, and Z, I've been there to a certain degree. And I get what they're going through and I get what their family's going through.
Mhm.
I'm not really, I was told that that's not really sympathetic, it's empathetic because it's something that I endure, I feel.
Mhm.
And so, and it helps me with my pain too. It kind of helps me kind of not carry the anger or the resentment or the why is me or woe is me. I'm kind of like, all right, just gotta let it go. I've thought it through, and I don't know. I don't, is that real? I mean, is that unrealistic or just like
So I'm sorry, is what unrealistic?
being more empathetic than sympathetic, or are they the same? Or, I don't know.
Well, I think you were talking about empathy and really sort of getting in another person's shoe to know what that experience is like. So you felt empathetic. And so your question about empathy versus sympathy regarding pain, I just want to be clear on your question.
Well, like you were saying, you don't, when you however your body responds, and so, a lot of times when I feel sympathetic for things that other people are going through, I might get angry, but I'm not angry at myself. I'm angry at the situation. Where when I'm sympathetic, I don't carry that. I don't know how to explain. I don't carry that anger with me. I just kind of like suppress it because I'm like, I've been there, done that. I understand it. It doesn't make me nauseous. It doesn't give me that gut feeling. It doesn't give me that tight chest feeling. It's just like, wow. I just, it's more heartfelt, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so you're saying that it's the pain that you feel when you hear about another person's story that you feel sympathetic about.
Yeah, or when I meet somebody else that's, and dealing with some type of health issue.
Yeah. And so it's not a problem that you feel that other person's pain.
Correct. So you don't kind of I've learned not to carry that with me,
Mhm.
and not to like make the situations equal. I mean, they are equal, but they're separate. I don't know how to explain it. I just
Okay. I mean, I guess what I'm understanding from you is that when you talk to somebody and they share an experience, you do feel pain and that you feel about that experience because it may be similar to yours. And so when you experience that pain, it sounds like you're accepting it and this is not a problem. I mean, you mentioned.
yes. So I mean, I guess more. I've often been told, so you are more empathetic than you are sympathetic, and I'm like, is that a bad thing? I'm like, I don't know. Doesn't feel like a bad thing.
Right. I mean, okay, so why are you questioning that? Do you?
Well, I guess because like you're saying, it tends to cause a lot of the situations that you gave or scenarios that you gave, it caused you, whether it was you internal pain struggling.
Right.
And
Okay. So
if I don't have that, is that bad? I mean,
my answer is probably, I don't think so. So, but let's look at a specific example. So let's say somebody you've encountered told you about their story, like that they have NMO.
right.
What is your thought?
I'm not sympathetic, like, oh, you poor thing. I'm like, wow, this is what you got to do, like fight or flight, I mean, because that's just my personality. If they ask me or they're looking for any feedback or comfort from me, that's what it would be. So, and I've kind of been told sometimes, that's a little harsh. So why aren't you more sympathetic? And then somebody, when I was talking to, said, well, that's not called sympathy, that's called empathy, because you can empathize with what they're going through, their pain, they're struggling, that kind of thing. So it's not something that I personally carry with me, but I can totally relate to. I don't know.
So when the person said that you should be more sympathetic.
Empathetic.
All
Not,
right.
yeah.
Well, they said that you were being empathetic, but they thought you should be more sympathetic. Is that what you said? Or they said you were being harsh. Somebody said you were being harsh.
Yes.
Okay. So in response to that, what was your thought?
Well, honestly, my thought came back to myself and my situation. And again, not just with the NMO, but just having a disease that I'm struggling with, a rare disease that, like I said, my personality is like fight or flight, and I don't flight. So I got to fight,
And then how did you feel when you thought that?
I felt good.
Yeah. So here's the thing. In that situation, when that person made that comment, that was your response to fight or flight. You were giving that person honest advice. And so that was your thought, that you're just telling them how you think about that situation. And your feeling in turn was that you felt good.
Yeah.
So you haven't created suffering there.
Okay.
And
Okay,
whatever it is, so it's actually like somebody can have an opinion about your comment, but you can have a belief about your comment. And that is your belief and you feel good about it. So that's-
okay. And no pain. No pain. No.
Yeah, this actually could, yeah, this is, I mean, unless you felt pain when the person made the comment that you were too harsh, then that was your pain, but you accepted it.
Okay,
And you didn't create a story about, oh my God, that person's right. I am too harsh. I shouldn't say that. What's wrong with me? You didn't go there. You just said, oh, that person said this comment, and this is my thought about it. I'm being honest, and I feel good about it.
right.
Done.
Hey, Mom, I
Beautiful.
think Letitia had something in the chat, and I'm gonna bring her on.
Thank you.
We love Letitia. She's here from South Africa.
Oh, so exciting.
Letitia, show yourself. Is she here? Yeah, there she is. Ooh. Hi, Letitia.
Hi guys. Sorry, I was just getting connected. Sorry, I did put a different question in the chat, but because of Ilona's mentioning, like sympathy and empathy, I thought that I would ask something. So often I find that like going out and being, especially in like large groups of people, or specifically, well, not actually specifically when it comes to people that I care about, can be anybody. I feel like I've opened myself up because of past experiences and not being empathized with. I've become super empathetic to the point where I pick up on other people's like emotions. And if I feel like somebody else is like struggling, or if they really sad, it makes me like really sad. Like I can feel, for example, I'll give you like an example, then maybe you can understand it a little bit better. So like a few weeks ago, we were at a 13-year-old's birthday party, and he was sitting with all of his older cousins, and because they were all like putting videos and stuff on YouTube, he was like, okay, I'm gonna join in. And I could see he really wanted to like be seen as cool by his older cousins. So he puts on this video, but then now everyone loses interest, and I'm sitting next to him and I can see him like turning, to see if is everyone paying attention. And every time he turned and people weren't paying attention, I could like see his heart just drop. But I could also feel that level of like disappointment and rejection on his behalf. And it won't just be like with one person. It's like I'm so tuned into what I feel like everyone else is going through and how they must be feeling, that it sometimes overwhelms me as well. So I don't know if in that sense I'm kind of also taking on other people's suffering or making myself suffer in a way, because then I get home from like social situations and I'm exhausted. And it doesn't even have to be with people that I know in person. It can be a random stranger that I see on the side of the road, like being caught in a racist incident. I feel for that person, or like I'll feel for the random homeless person on the side of the road, like, oh my goodness, what must they be going through? So I don't know how to create a balance between, I want to be empathetic because I feel like it actually makes me a better person, but I don't want it to be overwhelming. So I don't know if by being an empathetic person, you kind of invite that in. It's just something that you need to learn how to manage, or if I've like overdone it in a way.
Right, okay, I got you. So, I think that, so your question is basically, being an empathetic person, you feel a lot, and you want to know at what point is it a problem? Is that okay? And so I would say the answer is again, checking in with your body. And you said that sometimes when you have that empathetic feeling, empathetic thinking about things, when you see someone homeless or you saw your the 13-year-old trying to get everyone to watch the video, some of it actually makes you feel exhausted. When does it make you actually feel good, like deeply compassionate?
I think it makes me feel good when I have control. So if I speak up on behalf of somebody else and say, like, try and sway the situation so that I know it will work in that person's favor. So for example, with the video, I then nudged the older cousins and I was like, guys, please, can you just like say something about the video, because I can see that he's waiting for someone to say something. So that makes me feel better, but you can't always intervene. You know,
Right.
you can't always like take action. You don't always have control.
So if you feel like you can't take action, is that when you feel like it's a problem and makes you feel exhausted?
Yes. Or it's like I could have taken action, but I didn't. And now I'm filled with regret
Okay.
because I didn't have the courage to do something about it.
Okay. So in that situation, can we use maybe like the homeless person as an example there? Okay. So what is your thought when you see the homeless person?
Okay, I think let's look at when it comes to like homeless people, I don't know, like I've tried my best. I would do like lots of community outreach. We would cook for the homeless once a week and stuff like that. But then with a lot of South African homeless people, they're mostly on drugs, and it's difficult because you can't control that. That's not something that me alone I can control. So it's just a feeling of like, it's not me that necessarily failed them, but I feel bad for whatever situation it was that failed them. And I wish that I could help, but I don't have the capacity to help.
That's a thought right there. I don't have the capacity to help. So it's when you have a thought like that applied to any situation that you feel empathy toward, that is a thought that actually creates the feeling of exhaustion. And that is actually going to create suffering. Versus if you have a thought like, oh, here's my nephew, here's a situation, I care about him. And I think I could help him here because I'm noticing that people are not paying attention and I can make that happen. And because so it's a thought you have that you can actually change the outcome. And so that actually, did you feel good about that afterwards? That you were,
Yeah, a little bit.
when you
A
had the
little.
thought like I could help him because I see that he really wants people to view his video. Okay, so I think in those two scenarios, it all goes back to your thought. And when you have this feeling of empathy and you feel powerless, that I can't do anything about it, that is actually going to lead you to a feeling of exhaustion, like you said, and that creates suffering. So my first recommendation is to just become aware of the thought that you're having in response to that situation. And second, to consider that when you're, you being empathetic is not a problem. This is who you are. You feel like a lot of people's human experiences, and that's part of your experience. So think about like the thoughts that you can have that make you more you, like make you become more of you. You're empathetic, you're being able to help another person, right? The part about you being powerless and not being able to help people, that actually makes you feel less you, like less sort of compassionate toward situations that you feel like you can be impactful of. That part's not super clear, so let me dial that back. Let me just tell you, zero in on your thought. Like if you have a response of empathy and you want to know, am I creating suffering or just feeling that person's pain? I would say write it down and just look at your thoughts and say, with this thought, how does that make me feel? With this thought, how does that make me feel? And if you want, and if you encounter any other situations, feel free to email me. As Nell's going to actually put some chat about, if you want to subscribe to my email list, I've actually created a little free PDF for you guys to kickstart your new narrative, because ultimately that's kind of what I want you guys to do, is to think about the narrative you want to create in your life. So I guess in your case, you want to be empathetic, but you don't want it to exhaust you.
Yes.
So,
I don't know if we have time or if I should give someone else a chance to ask, but I did ask that other question in the chat box. I don't know if I should maybe explain it, but if someone else wants to go, then it's okay.
I don't see it here. I want to see if I can quickly read it.
We
It's
do have
in
a quick
Q&A.
time check. We have 5 minutes left
I
of our
think also,
session.
I think also, Rosanna had something in the chat about being a caregiver.
Yes.
Okay, so how about this? If I see the question, I'm going to respond to it on email.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for bringing all that. That was so helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Bozena, being a caregiver, how to behave when I see my husband having a bad mood day, give him space to go through it himself, or rather cheer him up and try to reverse the mood. I usually try the second option, but I'm not sure if this is the best option. Okay, I'm so glad you asked me this. So how your husband's mood is during the day is actually based on the choices he makes about his thoughts. So you actually can never control how another person's going to feel. They're responding to the thoughts that they are having. So that's one. The second point I want to make is, what is the thought you're having about yourself when your husband's having a bad day or in a bad mood?
I
And-
can, but do you want
and-
me to invite her on or?
Yeah. I should have probably asked you that too. I was thinking I was going to be able to just zip through some of these questions, but I'm going to need your response to answer it fully.
And Bojana is here with us all the way from Poland. So for her to
Oh my
come on.
God. Wow, love it. Thank you. Hi, Bojana. And Joanne, I see your question too. We're going to get to that before time's up. Hi, Bojana. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Okay.
I heard your question to me, and I would answer that I had this thought in my mind that when I am trying to cheer him up, it's rather I do it for myself, because usually in that days I feel somehow scared, I feel simply scared that something is going wrong, and and this is much more about my thoughts and my feelings than himself. So how to cope with that on my side?
So your thought was, I'm scared.
Yeah.
What are you scared of?
I'm scared that an incident might happen, and that we will have to go through it again and again, and I think mainly this.
Okay. And so when you think I'm feeling scared about what could happen, how does that make you feel?
Whew, that I will have to take again the load of different issues and everything.
Mhm.
Simply that it will come again, that I'm thinking, okay, we have come to a moment when the water was quiet,
Mhm.
and wow, is it coming again? Is he feeling something prior? He's not telling me, or what's going on?
Right.
This is, I think I feel uncertain simply.
Yes. And so that feeling of uncertainty drives you to do what? Like, how do you relate to him when you feel uncertain?
I feel sorry for him that he might be again, during kind of severe moment of his illness. I feel definitely sorry, and I feel sorry for him that it might come, and yeah.
And do you want him to be in a better mood? And
Yeah, I think, when I try to cheer him up, and maybe by force he starts to have a better mood, then somehow I think, okay, well, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe we will somehow, survive the day, and the other one. Yeah.
Right.
This-
Right. So with that thought, you are creating a feeling, so it creates a feeling of uncertainty, and your actions are such that you want him to be in a better mood. You're
Yeah.
trying to cheer him up, you're trying to make him sort of
Yeah,
better, right?
exactly.
You can feel better. So in that way, you are sort of like trying to control the situation and
Yeah.
like, but in doing so, you're also like creating, you're sort of making that feeling of uncertainty actually worse, because there's really nothing that you can do. Like, if you try to cheer him up, does that actually remove the uncertainty? Right.
You know, I think if he forced himself to start behaving more cheerful, then somehow it lowers the level of my uncertainty down, because then I think, okay, maybe it was not so bad, maybe it's nothing behind, maybe it's just a pure day with a bad mood and nothing else.
Right. So you created a situation where he has to be in a good mood and be cheerful in order for you to sort of feel less uncertain. But the fact is that the uncertainty is actually never really going to quite go away. So the pain of accepting uncertainty would actually, I think, if you give it a shot, will lead you to not want to control his situation or feel like you need to change his mood or exacerbate that feeling of uncertainty. So I would say in this situation, choosing a thought like, I'm scared and I need to make things more certain because I feel uncertain, is actually creating more suffering for you. Uncertainty piece is actually the pain.
Yeah.
You have to just accept it.
Yeah.
And actually, we always do. That is actually life for everyone, whether or not you live with a rare disease. Life is that is the topic for my second talk. So we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Joanna, what are your strategies for remaining positive and not feeling sorry for yourself for all the pain that you have to undergo? Such an interesting question. Okay. So we're actually a little bit past the hour, but I'm gonna tell you this very quickly, and I can expand upon it more on an email or when we talk later. Strategy is really focusing on thought. Obviously, that's the answer to everything. But if you go into the mode of accepting that you have this and that you're choosing to do this work, then let's see how I word this quickly. I think if you can recognize it's a choice you make, you don't actually have to do the work. If you think about having to do it, and that's your thought that I have to do it, that is actually the thought that's going to create suffering. But if you have this work and you know that you are choosing to do it because you love your kid, you love the person that you want to take care of, that is going to change everything. So the have to usually is associated with suffering. The choice that I want to be there and this is what I want to do is more of sort of an accepting pain situation. So I hope that that is helpful to you, but I think in a sort of a nutshell, that's the best way I can answer that question. Anything else here that I could answer? I know we're a little bit beyond the hour, and anyone who needs to go can definitely jump off. And
Maybe you should tell them about what to expect for session 2 so that they come back.
yes, okay, so a couple things. Session 2, we are talking about a new way to think about change, which is actually sort of rolled in with the idea of managing uncertainty. And so I think living with rare is, I think struggling with uncertainty is something that we probably experience quite a bit. And the third piece is going to be about how to navigate healthcare and how to be your best self-advocate. And I'm going to go through specifically about how to manage medical documents and how to keep all of that organized and how to talk to your doctors. But for now, I also wanted to mention very quickly, since Nell had mentioned her book, that if you wanted to purchase her book, I think, Nell, can you throw that into the chat, the link in Amazon? If you want to get on my email subscriber list and get that freebie about how to kickstart your new narrative, I'd love to see you there. If you just want to email me, you can jump through my website and send me a message. So
And just last, before we let everyone go, is there anything that we can do individually between now and the next session to work on all the things we talked about?
thank you. Yes, I actually think I want to know from you guys, if you want to do this bit of homework, if you could share with me what your narrative has been like in living with rare disease or being a caregiver. And what would you like your narrative to be?
Food for thought. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining again on a Saturday. Maggie, hats off to you. Thank you for doing this. It is so helpful to all of us to hear everything that you shared. And I hope that you'll all join us for session 2 and session 3. We'll put more information out about both soon. Please go to Maggie's website and check out Nell's book. Nell, excellent job moderating as per usual. And as Maggie said, you know, check in with your body and be vulnerable with yourself, open and honest with yourself above everything else.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for all joining.
Thank you. Have a good one.